Ronan Vale didn't mean to look at the cameras. He told himself he was done with that habit, done with watching the house like it was an enemy. But insomnia had him back in his office, San Francisco fog pressing against the glass. The skyline blinked beyond him, but the monitor held his attention like a warning he couldn't ignore tonight, alone. He opened the security app out of boredom. Then he sat up. Camera 12 showed the east corridor. The motion lights were low and the hallway should have been empty. It wasn't. Imani Brooks crossed the frame with a steady, careful walk that made Ronan's stomach tighten. Navy housekeeping sweater. Hair in a neat bun. Keys in her hand. She stopped at the rope barrier he'd installed 2 months ago, an obvious warning. She stepped around it anyway. Ronan's fingers went cold on the mouse. He heard his own voice from her first day, sharp and final. Do not enter the east corridor. Ever. If you hear anything, turn around and call me. That was the only instruction he'd repeated twice. Imani reached the end of the hall where the door sat. White paint, brass knob, keypad. She didn't touch the keypad. She didn't knock. She leaned down, pressed her ear to the wood and stayed there listening. Ronan stood so fast his chair clipped the wall. He watched her lift a hand to her chest like she was slowing a panic. Then, without looking back, she slid something thin from her apron pocket, metal catching the dim light. A key. His key. The lock turned. The security feed didn't glitch. No alarm sounded. Just a soft click that seemed to travel through the speakers and into Ronan's ribs. Imani slipped inside and the door closed behind her. For one long second, the camera showed only an empty corridor. Then the east wing light flickered once, and went dark. Imani had tried to ignore it at first. The east wing was quiet in a way that felt expensive, thick carpet, heavy curtains, walls built to swallow sound. On her second night, she heard a faint tapping near the sealed corridor. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. Like someone spelling a message with no words. She blamed the house. Pipes. Old beams. Anything. But it returned the next night. Always after midnight. Always from the same spot, deep under the floor. By the 4th night, the tapping changed. A muffled cry, small and strained, as if it had been forced through cloth. Imani froze with a polishing rag in her hand. The cry stopped the moment she stopped moving, like whoever made it could sense her attention. She reported it the way she'd been trained, calm voice, eyes lowered. Ronan listened without blinking, then walked her to the rope barrier himself. You don't go past this, he said flat. I won't, she promised. If you hear anything again, you call me. Immediately. Yes, sir. He didn't ask what she heard. He didn't ask why. He only tightened the barrier and installed another camera that same day. After that, the sound grew louder, almost impatient. Tonight, carrying fresh linens, she heard it again. 3 taps, pause, 2, then a heavy thud like a body shifting in a tight space. Imani set the linens down. Her hands trembled. She thought about calling Ronan, letting his power handle it. Then a whisper slipped up through the floorboards, thin as breath. Please. That single word landed in her chest and stayed there. Not curiosity. Not rebellion. Just something human. Long after the sound faded into silence, the word stayed with her. Not fear. Not defiance. Just the quiet weight of knowing someone was asking to be seen. And maybe you felt that before too. That moment when you hear something you're not supposed to hear, see something you're not supposed to see, and you have to decide whether to walk away or listen. If you were in Imani's place, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments. The portrait had always unsettled Imani even before tonight. It hung at the end of the east corridor, larger than the others, framed in dark walnut. Ronan stood in the center, younger, smiling stiffly. A woman beside him, elegant, distant. and a boy between them, blurred slightly, like the painter hadn't wanted him noticed. Imani stepped closer. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against her ears. She reached for the frame to steady herself, and it shifted. Not much. Just enough. Her breath caught. She ran her fingers along the wall and felt a seam hidden beneath the frame's edge. A panel. Carefully disguised. Whoever built it expected no one to look too closely. Imani thought of the whisper. Please. She lifted the portrait from its hook. Behind it was a narrow door, painted the same color as the wall, with a recessed handle and a simple latch. No keypad. No warning sign. Her pulse thudded loud enough to feel dangerous. She listened again. Nothing. Then, one soft knock from the other side. Imani swallowed. She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't paid for this. She was supposed to clean, to disappear, to follow rules written by men who never asked why. Her hand hovered over the latch. She imagined Ronan's face if he found her here. The cameras. The consequences. Another knock. Weaker. She pulled the latch. Cold air breathed out, smelling faintly of concrete and metal. A thin stairwell appeared, descending sharply into darkness, the light from the corridor barely reaching the first step. Imani stood there, heart pounding, realizing the house wasn't just hiding memories. It was hiding someone. And she was already too far in to pretend otherwise. The door closed behind her with a soft finality that made Imani pause. The stairwell swallowed sound. Each step was narrow, steel-edged, bolted into concrete. No dust. No decay. This wasn't forgotten. It was maintained. She descended slowly, counting her breaths, hands sliding along the cold railing. The light faded after the third step, replaced by a dim emergency glow embedded low in the wall. Halfway down she heard it again. Breathing. Shallow. Uneven. Close. Hello, she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. The breathing hitched. I'm not here to hurt you, she said, though she had no idea if that was true anymore. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a narrow corridor with padded walls. Soundproofing. Her stomach turned. A reinforced door stood at the end, thicker than any door upstairs, its surface scarred with faint scratch marks. Imani approached slowly. I heard you, she said. You don't have to hide. Pause. Then a voice, cracked and young. Is he with you? The question cut deeper than fear. No, she answered honestly. It's just me. The locks disengaged with a muted click. The door creaked open a few inches, then stopped. One eye appeared in the gap, wide, bloodshot, searching. You won't tell him? The voice asked. Imani knelt to the floor, lowering herself to his level. I won't lie to you, she said gently. But I won't leave you here. The door opened wider. Inside sat a thin boy wrapped in a blanket that had once been white. His hair was overgrown. His hands shook in his lap. She recognized his face instantly. Ellis Vale. The child the papers said was away. The child the house had been built to forget. And in that silent room beneath millions of dollars of polished floors, Imani understood the truth. This wasn't a secret. It was a prison. Ellis didn't stand when Imani entered. He didn't even try. He sat with his back against the padded wall, knees pulled to his chest, blanket clutched tight like it was the only thing holding him together. The room was small, too small for a growing boy. A narrow cot. A metal shelf with half-empty water bottles. A single light recessed into the ceiling, dimmed low. Imani took it in without letting it show on her face. Hi, she said softly. My name is Imani. Ellis blinked at her, slow and cautious, like sudden movement might make her disappear. You're not supposed to be down here. I know. That seemed to confuse him more than if she'd argued. He studied her uniform, the scuffed shoes, the way she kept her hands open and visible. "Are you staff? I clean upstairs." His lips pressed together. A small, humorless smile tugged at one corner. "Figures." She sat on the floor a few feet away, giving him space. Up close she could see how thin he was. Not sick. Not weak. Just worn down like a candle burned too long in one place. "They say you're in Santa Barbara," she said carefully. Ellis's jaw tightened. "That's what he tells people." "Who's he?" Alice hesitated, then answered anyway. "My father." The word didn't sound like love. It sounded like distance. Imani nodded, letting silence do its work. "How long have you been here?" Alice stared at the wall. "Long enough to forget what day it is." Her chest ached, but she kept her voice steady. "Why didn't you scream?" "I did. At first." He swallowed. "Then I learned it just made things worse." She noticed the faint marks on the door. Fingernails. Desperation. Imani took a slow breath. "Alice, you don't belong down here." He looked at her, then really looked. "Neither do secrets," he said. And just like that, she knew he was smarter than anyone upstairs gave him credit for. Imani stood to check the room, moving carefully, announcing every step. Alice tracked her with his eyes. When a faint vibration hummed through the walls, the house shifting above, he flinched so hard his heel struck the cot frame. His breath went sharp and fast. "Hey," Imani said gently, stopping where she was. "It's okay. That's just the house." "No," Alice whispered. "That means someone's walking near the corridor." Her stomach tightened. "How do you know?" "They always walk the same way," he said. "Heavy shoes. Counted steps." She lowered herself again, slow, predictable. "Has anyone been down here tonight?" Alice shook his head. "Not since yesterday." "Who comes?" He hesitated, then answered in fragments, like each word cost him something. "Security. A doctor sometimes. And him." Imani didn't ask which him. Alice pressed his palms into his eyes, breathing hard. "If they hear noise, they come. If they think I'm talking, they stay longer." Imani felt anger rise, sharp and dangerous. She pushed it down. This wasn't about her feelings. "You're safe right now," she said. "I'm here." He let out a broken laugh. "You won't be." She didn't argue. Promises felt fragile in a place like this. Instead, she asked, "What happened, Ellis?" His hands dropped slowly. His eyes were wet but steady now. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to," he said. "And after that, they stopped trusting me." Upstairs, somewhere far above them, a door closed. Ellis stiffened. Imani listened, heart pounding, realizing the truth was bigger than one hidden room. And whatever Ellis had seen was the reason this place existed at all. Ellis didn't speak right away. He picked at the edge of the blanket, pulling loose threads, unraveling it the way his life seemed to have unraveled down here. Imani waited. Silence, she'd learned, was sometimes safer than questions. "It was late," he finally said. "I couldn't sleep." She nodded, encouraging without pushing. "There were cars in the drive. Not ours. Black SUVs." His voice stayed calm, but his hands shook. "No headlights. They parked by the vineyard like they didn't want the house to notice them." Imani felt a chill creep up her arms. "I thought it was a party," Ellis went on. "So I followed. I hid at the top of the stairs. I wasn't trying to spy. I just wanted to know." He swallowed. "They weren't friends." He described the men in pieces, tattoos half hidden by cuffs, voices low and clipped, a symbol sketched onto the glass table with a fingertip and condensation. He remembered names, places. One word repeated over and over like a threat disguised as business. Leverage. "They talked about people like numbers," Alice said. about moving money, making things disappear. One man laughed and said families were the easiest pressure point. Imani's jaw tightened. "My dad didn't stop them," Ellis whispered. He nodded. He agreed. The room felt smaller with every word. "I backed up," Ellis said. "I hit a vase. It broke." His breath hitched. They all looked at the stairs. Imani could see it, the moment childhood ended. "No one chased me," Ellis continued. "Not that night. But the next day I wasn't allowed to leave my room. Then a doctor came. Then the stairs. Then this place." He finally looked at her, eyes sharp with something like shame. "I wasn't sick. I was inconvenient." Imani reached out, resting her hand on the floor between them. "You were brave," she said. Ellis shook his head. "Brave doesn't keep you free." "No," she agreed softly. "But truth might." And that was the moment he decided to tell her everything. Imani didn't leave Ellis right away. When she finally did, it was with a weight in her chest that made each step upstairs feel heavier than the last. She moved through the east wing like a ghost, every creak of the floor sending a jolt through her nerves. In Ronan's study, the desk was unlocked. That alone felt wrong. She told herself she was just straightening up, aligning papers, being the maid she was paid to be. But her eyes caught on a thin folder tucked beneath a leather blotter. Ellis Vale, confidential. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Medical reports, progress notes, diagnoses that leaned heavily on vague language, episodes, distortions, heightened imagination, dates that didn't line up, signatures from doctors whose names repeated too often. She flipped faster. A consent form, signed by Ronan. Authorization for temporary isolation for emotional stabilization. Another document labeled transfer, listing a facility in Santa Barbara that didn't match any address. Imani pulled out her phone and searched. Nothing. No clinic. No program. Just an empty lot off a service road. Her throat tightened. This wasn't protection. It was paperwork built to look clean enough for anyone who didn't want to look too hard. She closed the folder carefully, sliding it back exactly where it had been. In the reflection of the window she saw herself, uniform, tired eyes, a woman the system never expected to notice details. But she had noticed. Downstairs, beneath polished floors and expensive silence, a boy was waiting. And now Imani knew the truth was already written. It just needed someone brave enough to read it out loud. Ronan Vale stood alone in the west wing, staring at the vineyard as dawn thinned the dark. He told himself the same thing he'd repeated for months, that everything he'd done was necessary. That control was not cruelty. That distance was safer than exposure. After that night, after Ellis saw what he shouldn't have, Ronan had panicked in a way he never allowed himself to do in boardrooms. Men like the ones at that table didn't forgive witnesses. They erased them. Slowly, quietly, permanently. Ellis was 14. Sensitive. Curious. Unpredictable. Ronan convinced himself hiding his son was the only way to keep him alive. The doctors had been easy. Money smoothed uncertainty into signatures. The security team followed instructions without asking questions. Paperwork created a version of Ellis that the world could accept, a troubled boy receiving care somewhere far away. Ronan told himself it was temporary. Weeks turned into months. Every time he descended those stairs, Ellis recoiled like Ronan was a stranger. That hurt more than Ronan expected, but he buried it under logic. Better a son who hated him than a son who disappeared. When Ellis stopped speaking, Ronan felt relief. Silence meant safety. Now, watching the east wing feet flicker, that logic cracked. The maid was down there. The wrong witness had found the right secret. Ronan's phone buzzed, an encrypted message from security. Movement detected. Swing. He tightened his grip on the device. This situation was spiraling. Exposure was contagious. One loose thread and everything unraveled. The deals, the alliances, the fragile balance he'd built to survive. Ronan turned from the window and headed toward the corridor. He told himself he would fix this. That he always did. Imani returned to the room beneath the house with a notebook folded into her apron. Ellis noticed immediately. "You found something?" he said. "Yes," she answered. "But I need your help." His shoulders tensed, fear flaring again. "If I say the wrong thing." "You won't," she said firmly. "We'll be careful." She sat cross-legged across from him. "You said you heard names. Can you remember any?" Ellis closed his eyes, breathing slowly. "Some first names. Some places." He swallowed. One man was called Mercer. Another answered to Fox, but that didn't feel real. Imani wrote quickly. They talked about Oakland. Reno. A dock outside Stockton. His eyes stayed shut. And a symbol. 3 lines crossing a circle. They kept drawing it when they thought no one was watching. Her pen paused. "That matters." Ellis opened his eyes. "Why?" "Because patterns get noticed," she said. "Especially by people trained to look for them." He nodded, jaw tight. "There was a woman too. She didn't talk much. But when she did, everyone listened. Do you remember her name?" Ellis hesitated, then whispered it. Imani wrote it down carefully, feeling the weight of it settle into the page. "You're doing the right thing," she said. Ellis didn't smile. "I just don't want to disappear again." Imani folded the notebook and slipped it back into her apron. "You won't," she promised, knowing that from this moment on, there was no turning back. Above them, footsteps echoed faintly in the corridor. And the clock had officially started ticking. Imani stood at the kitchen sink long after the water had gone cold. The notebook pressed against her side felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than ink and paper. Names. Places. A boy's fear. A truth powerful men had buried under money and silence. She could still walk away. She imagined it clearly, finishing her shift, returning her keys, boarding the early bus out of Napa Valley. No one would chase a maid who kept her head down. No one ever had. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Ellis flinch at footsteps that weren't even there. Heard the way his voice broke when he said disappear. Imani dried her hands slowly. She thought of her own childhood in South Carolina, of nights when adults chose comfort over courage, when silence passed itself off as wisdom. She'd learned early what it cost children when grown people decided not to see. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ronan's office assistant, brief and polite. "Mr. Vale would like to see you before you leave tonight." Imani's pulse quickened, but her resolve sharpened with it. She opened her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't used in years. A journalist in Oakland who once wrote about housing fraud and vanished witnesses. Someone stubborn. Someone careful. Imani began typing. She didn't send it yet. Instead, she returned downstairs one last time. Ellis looked up when she entered, searching her face. "I have to make a choice," she told him honestly. Ellis nodded. "So do I." She held his gaze. "If I do this, things will change. Fast." "Good," he said quietly. "Because staying like this is worse." Imani took a breath, steadying her shaking hands. Upstairs, power waited for obedience. Down here, a child waited for courage. She pulled out her phone and pressed send. The confirmation tone sounded too loud in the quiet room. Ellis exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. "What did you send?" he asked. "Enough to make people ask questions," Imani said. "Not enough to put you in danger tonight." She moved quickly after that, photographing the notebook pages, the falsified records, the reinforced door. Each click felt like crossing another line she couldn't uncross. Her phone buzzed again. Received. Calling you now. Clint. Imani silenced it. Not yet, she whispered. Soon. Footsteps echoed overhead, measured, heavy, unmistakable. Ellis stiffened, panic flashing across his face. Hey, Imani said, placing a steady hand on the floor between them. Look at me. He did. You're not alone anymore, she said. Whatever happens next, someone knows you're here. The footsteps stopped. Pause. Then the sound of a door opening upstairs. Imani stood, heart pounding, every sense sharpened. She slipped the phone back into her apron and straightened her uniform, becoming invisible again just in time. The reinforced door behind her remained closed. But the truth was already moving, traveling through signals and servers and screens far beyond the reach of this house. Some messages couldn't be intercepted. Some secrets, once spoken, refused to stay buried. And above them, Ronan Vale was walking toward the East Wing, unaware that the story he'd spent months controlling no longer belonged to him. Ronan Vale reached the East Corridor just as the lights flickered back on. The rope barrier still hung in place, perfectly undisturbed. For a brief, foolish second, he wondered if he'd imagined everything, until he saw the portrait at the end of the hall, hanging slightly crooked. His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, fingers brushing the frame. It shifted easily. Too easily. So that's how, he murmured. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Sir? Imani stood several feet away, posture calm, hands folded in front of her like nothing in the world was wrong. If Ronan hadn't known better, he might have believed her. How long? He asked quietly. Have you been curious? Imani met his gaze. Long enough to hear someone asking for help. Ronan's expression hardened. You should have called me. And say what? She replied. That a child was hidden under this house? Silence snapped between them. Ronan lowered his voice. You don't understand what you've stepped into. I understand enough, she said. Enough to know this isn't protection. He moved closer, towering now, anger leaking through control. That boy is alive because of me. And terrified because of you, Imani said. The words landed harder than he expected. Ronan felt something crack, then sealed it shut just as quickly. You will forget what you saw, he said. You will finish your shift and you will leave. This house will handle the rest. Imani didn't move. Behind the wall, somewhere beneath their feet, Ellis listened. Ronan leaned in. People who interfere don't get second chances. Imani's voice stayed steady. Neither do people who mistake fear for safety. A sharp vibration buzzed through Ronan's pocket. An alert. His eyes flicked to his phone, then back to her, uncertainty flashing for the first time. Whatever she'd done, it was already in motion. The sound reached them before the vehicles appeared. Low engines. Slow. Intentional. Ronan stiffened. You called someone? Imani shook her head. Not the way you think. The driveway lights flared to life outside the East Wing windows, casting long shadows down the corridor. Black SUVs rolled in, one after another, stopping short of the main entrance. Ronan's phone buzzed again. Security inbound. Handle quietly. His mouth tightened. You've put us all at risk. No, Imani said. You did that the moment you locked a child away. Footsteps thundered from the west side of the house. Heavy boots. Too many. Ellis's breathing echoed faintly through the walls below, fast and frightened. Ronan straightened his jacket, slipping back into authority. This ends now. Imani stepped back but not away. She positioned herself squarely in front of the portrait. You won't touch him, she said. Ronan stared at her, incredulous. You think standing there will stop anything? I think time will, she replied. Outside voices rose, tense, sharp. One SUV door slammed. Another. Then a new sound cut through it all. A siren. Not private. Not controlled. Public. Distant, but closing fast. Ronan's face drained of color. Imani exhaled slowly, eyes never leaving his. Your security came, she said. So did someone else. The house, built on silence and power, held its breath. And for the first time, Ronan Vale realized he might not be the one deciding how this story ended. The sirens grew louder, multiplying, echoing off the vineyard hills like a reckoning Ronan couldn't outrun. He checked his phone again, fingers unsteady. Messages stacked too fast to read. Security asking for instructions, unfamiliar numbers calling and calling back. Control, the thing he trusted most, was slipping through his hands. Imani didn't move. She stood in front of the portrait, back straight, like a quiet line that could no longer be crossed. The front doors opened downstairs. Voices followed, firm, official, unafraid. The kind that didn't ask permission to enter. Federal agents, someone announced. Mr. Vale, we need to speak with you. Ronan closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, the house felt different. Smaller. Exposed. He looked at Imani. You have no idea what you've started. She met his gaze. I know exactly what I ended. Bootsteps approached the east wing. A woman in a dark jacket appeared first, badge visible, eyes sharp and observant. She took in the corridor, the portrait, the way Ronan stood just slightly too close to the wall. Move away from the frame, she said calmly. Ronan didn't. Two agents stepped forward. That's far enough, one warned. Ronan exhaled, slow and bitter, and finally stepped aside. The portrait was lifted. The hidden door revealed. The stairwell yawned open like a truth finally allowed to breathe. Down below, a voice trembled. Imani? I'm here, she called back. You're not alone anymore. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Radios crackled. Words like unauthorized confinement and falsified records floated through the air, heavy and irreversible. As Ronan was guided away, his shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in the quiet understanding that the story had left him behind. It no longer belonged to the house. It belonged to the truth. Morning arrived gently, as if careful not to frighten anyone. Ellis stood on the front steps wrapped in a thick gray blanket, blinking against the soft Napa sunlight. The air felt different out here, lighter, unsupervised. He inhaled slowly. Nothing bad happened. Imani stood a few feet away, giving him space, watching the way his shoulders rose and fell like he was learning how to breathe again. A medic spoke quietly nearby, explaining things without rushing him. You don't have to answer anything right now, the woman said. We'll go at your pace. Ellis nodded. He looked toward the driveway where unmarked vehicles were still parked, agents moving in and out with folders and boxes. The house loomed behind them, silent and stripped of its authority. Is he gone? Ellis asked. Yes, Imani said. He can't hurt you anymore. Ellis stared at the sky for a long moment. I forgot it was this big. Imani smiled softly. It hasn't gone anywhere. He stepped down one stair, then another. Each movement was careful, like the ground might change its mind. When he reached the gravel, he stopped and looked back at her. You didn't have to do this. I know, she said. That's why it mattered, he replied. A breeze moved through the vineyard, rustling leaves, carrying the scent of earth and grapes and something new. Ellis took another breath, deeper this time. For the first time in months, the world didn't feel like it was closing in. It felt open, and he was finally standing in it. Ronan Vale sat in the back of the vehicle with his hands folded neatly in his lap. No cuffs. No raised voices. Just the low hum of the engine as vineyards slipped past the window, row after perfect row. He'd always admired order, built his life around it, controlled it, trusted it. Now it moved on without him. An agent across from him flipped through a folder, calm and thorough, asking questions Ronan chose not to answer. He stared instead at his reflection in the glass, older than he remembered, eyes dulled by months of pretending his choices were temporary. He thought of Ellis. Not the frightened boy beneath the house, but the child who once raced him down these same rows, laughing too loud, asking too many questions. Ronan had loved that curiosity once, until it became dangerous. Power had taught him a simple rule: protect the structure at all costs. Even if the cost was human. The vehicle slowed. Ronan closed his eyes. For the first time there were no cameras to watch, no calls to make, no systems to override. Silence settled, not the enforced kind he'd used to keep secrets safe, but a hollow quiet that left room for regret. Somewhere behind him, a truth he couldn't bury anymore was unfolding without his permission. And somewhere else his son was standing in the light. Ronan swallowed hard, realizing too late that safety built on fear was never protection at all. It was just another kind of prison. Imani packed her things just before noon. The house was quieter than she'd ever known it. No instructions, no tension humming beneath the walls. Just sunlight drifting through windows that no longer felt guarded. She paused in the hallway one last time, then turned away without looking back. Outside, Alice sat on the steps, a paper cup warming his hands. He looked up when he saw her, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Are you leaving?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "But not disappearing." He nodded, thinking. "I don't know how to thank you." Imani smiled gently. "You already did. You told the truth." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't hurt. A social worker approached, respectful, careful. "We're ready when you are, Alice." He stood, then hesitated. "Will I see you again?" Imani reached into her bag and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "When you're ready," she said, placing it in his hand. He held it like it mattered. As she walked down the drive, the vineyard stretching wide and green ahead of her, Imani felt the weight lift. Not because it was over, but because she hadn't looked away. She hadn't been brave in the way movies make bravery look. She'd simply listened. Followed a sound no one else wanted to hear. Chose a child over comfort. And somewhere behind her, a family had been cracked open. Not destroyed, but finally forced to breathe. Sometimes saving people doesn't look like rescue. Sometimes it looks like telling the truth, and refusing to be silent ever again. Stories like this aren't just about what happened. They're about the moments we recognize ourselves in, the choices we hope we'd make if silence ever asked something of us. If this story moved you, take a second to like the video so it can reach someone who might need it. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what courage looks like in everyday lives. And if there was a moment that stayed with you or a choice you'd have made differently, leave a comment below. We read every one. Your voice matters more than you know.